You're listening to the Sex and Psychology Podcast, the sex ed you never got in school and won't get anywhere else. I am your host, Dr. Justin Lehmiller. I am a social psychologist and research fellow at the Kinsey Institute and author of the book, Tell Me What You Want, The Science of Sexual Desire and How It Can Help You Improve Your Sex Life. Think back to your sex education for a moment. Were you advised to, quote, save yourself for marriage? Were you asked to sign a purity pledge? For millions of people, that was their experience. They weren't really taught what they needed to know about sex, and instead were just told, don't do it. And in many cases, they were encouraged to take a formal public vow of sexual abstinence. This might sound like a relic of the past, but it's not. And purity culture is actually making a kind of comeback. As we'll discuss today, purity culture reached its peak back in the 1980s and 90s before falling out of favor. However, when purity culture became countercultural, it started picking up steam again. So in today's show, we're going to talk about the rise, fall, and subsequent resurrection of purity culture. We're also going to do a deep dive into the world of abstinence pledges specifically. So, for example, what does the research actually say about how abstinence pledges affect sexual behavior? Do they really delay sex? Are abstinence pledges even realistic in a world where the average age of first marriage is nearly 30? And are there risks of waiting until marriage to start exploring your sexuality? My guest is Lauren Elise Rogers, a certified holistic sexuality educator and embodied intimacy and relationship coach. Her approach to education and coaching is deeply rooted in her own pain to purpose journey. Lauren brings an empathetic and non-judgmental approach, offering practical tools that empower her clients to take ownership of their pleasure and grow in confidence and connection. This is going to be another fascinating conversation. Stick around and we're going to jump in right after the break. Do you ever find yourself dreaming about a career where you get to talk about sex and psychology all day long? What if I told you there's a place that can connect you with world-class experts and has a large, thriving community? Sexual Health Alliance does just that. Sexual Health Alliance helps you to build the career of your dreams and is at the forefront of sexuality education. Students come from all parts of the world and from all types of backgrounds. Whether you're in school just starting out on your journey or building advanced skills in your profession, Sexual Health Alliance's comprehensive certifications, engaging events, and self-paced online education will move you beyond the basics and set you up to become sexceptional. Visit sexualhealthalliance.com and start building the sexuality career of your dreams today. And let them know that you heard about Sexual Health Alliance on this podcast. Okay, Lauren, let's talk about abstinence pledges. Now, we're going to start with the basics. So what might a typical abstinence pledge look like? I mean, what are people being asked to do or not do when they take one of these pledges? Walk us through the process.
So these abstinence pledges are usually an attempt to keep us from sexually transmitted infections and early teen pregnancies. So let's start by all agreeing that these would be great. We all love some public health. I'm a fan, and I am a fan of reducing teen pregnancies around before young people are interested in being parents. I think we all could agree that we all started from the same place. But what these abstinence pledges are is in essence a promise to save sex until marriage. So the full terminology would be abstinence only until marriage. And what we are inferring then is that sex is best when saved for your marriage, which ideally is between one man and one woman. And what we are doing is encouraging these teenagers often to sign off on this promise that they will not be sexually active until their wedding day. And we have decided when they sign these pledges, well then good, the work here is done. We do not need to provide any more education at this time because we've solved the problem. No more STIs, no more teen pregnancies. We're good. We'll give them education when they're married. That's an abstinence-only pledge.
Talk about making sex ed simple. Just sign this card and you're good to go until you're married.
You're good. Usually, they're also accompanied by a slew of morals and values statements, depending on where you're signing this pledge. If you're signing this pledge in your church environment, it is usually coming with some form of religious scripting. If you're signing this in your school, where this still happens, even here in 2025, you are also getting kind of fear-based education at this point. We are scaring you with photos of sexually transmitted infections and stories of scary, different experiences of teens who experienced pregnancy. And we are using fear-based rhetoric to get you to sign this document.
I gotta say, this feels like something from another era. I mean, I know these programs kind of had their heyday back in the 1980s and 90s. And, I remember being in school at that time, and we had the DARE programs that were trying to get us to take abstinence pledges for drug use. And running parallel to that were all of these pushes for sexual abstinence pledges too. Everybody was just about abstinence from everything. And, at the time, I think this movement was really stemming in part from a fear of STIs, because the AIDS epidemic was still a pretty new thing at that time. And it made a lot of people scared of sex. And I think it gave a lot of purity culture advocates license or fuel to really advance their agenda, because they had this, boogeyman in the form of the AIDS epidemic that they could use as a way to sort of push why abstinence is more important than ever, right? So, are these programs still alive and well today? I mean, do we have any sense of, are they more common, less common than they used to be? Do we know anything about that?
They are, because states still get to decide what type of sexuality education happens inside a school system, which I'm not actually anti. I think it's good. And yet, most of our 50 states are not required to provide scientifically and medically accurate sexuality education. Still, to this day. And so school system by school system, so here in my little town here in Virginia, you better believe that it is heteronormative scripting and that it is strong emphasis on abstinence. I happen to have a 15-year-old, so this is fascinating because I get to do my own research of what's happening in schools around me. And it's wild to see the handouts that come home. Just wild. Yeah. And then I have colleagues or clients who are down in Florida, where we are making sexuality education even more restrictive than it has been in the past. And so, yes, this is still alive and well. Whether or not we are littering the National Mall with abstinence pledges, there's a famous photo, anybody can go find it, where we literally were making it a public art experiment of, look at all of these teens. 20,000, was it? 100,000? It's so many teenagers who signed these pledges. And yes, this is still happening even to this day.
Yeah. So the intent behind these pledges is usually to encourage self-control and to promote traditional values. But what does the research actually say in terms of how well they work with respect to actually achieving their goals? So, for example, do people who take abstinence pledges actually delay sexual activity, or does this maybe just change the way that people report their sexual activity?
So you're the researcher. I'm going to give my recent facts, and then you toss out to me if there's anything more updated that you've run into.
All right.
Because I like it too. So what my research shows is that no, actually, we have no data to prove that these are successful. In fact, what we do see is this does not delay first intercourse at all. In fact, what we see a spike of is less preparedness with first intercourse. So instead, we see less use of pregnancy prevention methods such as condoms, because these young people are not given access to these things, because then we're teaching them that if they have a condom in their pocket or condoms in their backpack or condoms in their purse, then they are in essence preparing for this sinful act. And so no, all of my research continues to show that it is less effective at delaying first intercourse, in contrast to comprehensive sexuality education that is developmentally appropriate, which 100% tends to delay first intercourse. In fact, I read some fascinating research about promise breakers, and that more folks tend to feel tremendous guilt and shame about this promise that they done broke. And so then they basically start to go into this narrative of, well, since I broke my promise anyway, I might as well. And then they continue to engage in risky sexual behaviors because they were never given any adequate education. But you tell me, I mean, tossing the question back to you, this is what I find.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're pretty spot on. I mean, before the show, I did kind of a deep dive into the limited data that's out there on abstinence pledges, and I found some interesting findings. What the data suggests is that there is this small subset of people who take these pledges where it does seem to work for them, where they do delay sexual activity, but that comes with the caveat that it usually only quote unquote works when you have a large group of adolescents where all of their peers are taking the pledges too, right? And so it seems like there's sort of this peer or normative pressure element to it where, again, for most people, they're not sticking to the pledge, but there is this subset who does seem to stick to it. And I don't know that we fully know or understand who that subset is. Maybe there are people who are just much more religiously motivated or, come from these families where, their faith is this really core element of who they are. But, there is this small group of people for whom it does, quote unquote, work. But what I find really fascinating is that there is other research out there where they look at adolescents who take these abstinence pledges, and then a year later, they ask them, have you ever taken an abstinence pledge? And literally more than half of them are like, no, I never took it.
They say no.
Right. Which to me, I'm like, what the fuck? Right. So it makes me wonder, are a lot of the people who are signing these pledges just doing it because they feel pressured to do it? They feel like it's something a piece of paper they have to sign. And then as soon as they sign it, they kind of forget it. Right.
Yes.
I kind of get the feeling that a lot of people who are taking these pledges just weren't ever taking them seriously to begin with. But yeah.
Again, fascinating that I happen to have a sophomore in high school in my home, right? It's my own sample data. So if you asked my teenager if she signed a form last year, she wouldn't remember anything.
No.
Not at all. Her health class, what? Right? The only reason she might remember more is that she brings this hilarious stuff home with me and we talk all about it because she knows my area of work and is the biggest fan of this work. But no, she wouldn't remember. Something you were saying earlier made me think of this fascinating thing that I went down a rabbit hole on when I read that piece about, yes, there is a subset that tends to keep to these pledges when there is a large enough pool around them. What I found here was that these became an identity movement. Mm-hmm. And so it was so much more linked to their identity, which I so understood because that was me, right? I did ascribe to this idea of abstinence only until marriage because of the people who are around me. But then this was even more fascinating because they studied these growing identity movements inside of schools. There is one here, a high school here, that is, I'm watching this happen because we are in the wake of Charlie Kirk's death and all of this type of stuff. There's a surge of moving into this idea of purity. Now, we found that in order for an identity movement to be successful, it needed to be a minority movement. So there needed to be this feeling of, oh, we're being persecuted, and the only right way is to pledge our bodies as pure and good. And so even within these subsets, there was this beautiful, fascinating data point of a tipping point there too, that once it became too cool, it wasn't even interesting for the folks who were a part of that smaller subset. And I was like, oh, this is fascinating. We could go down this rabbit hole forever.
When purity culture becomes counterculture, right?
Right.
That's something that can actually increase its popularity and draw people to it. And I think that's actually part of what we're seeing with Gen Z right now.
Yes.
And Gen Z, I think, is a fascinating generation to talk about because everybody likes to talk about Gen Z as this monolith. And, you can read tons of media stories that are like Gen Z is the generation of polyamory and non-monogamy and free love and all these other things. But by the same token, they're also the generation of trad wives and purity culture and, this return to traditional values, so it's really a tale of two cities, if you will, of Gen Z in terms of, on the one hand, you've got this contingent of them that's becoming increasingly sexually liberal and progressive, and also in terms of how they think about and understand things like sexual orientation and gender identity. But on the other hand, you've got this other subset of Gen Z that is very, very traditional in a lot of their sexual beliefs and wants this kind of return to traditional values and really glamorizes this idea of, for example, women taking on traditional roles in a marriage and delaying sex until marriage and so forth.
Nope. Horse of a different color, right?
Yeah.
And it's fascinating to see what we were just sharing is that I think in a quest for identity, which is something that all of us as human beings long for, wouldn't it make sense? Yes, that we do seek out these countercultural messages that could provide us with a sense of community, a sense of identity. And it's just endlessly fascinating to me. Does it break my heart in some way? Yes, when I see these trad wives who are ascribing to the same things that I was ascribing to, and yet I agree with you, right? These are we see this historically. It comes and around, and I think we'll see the swing out and we'll see the swing in, and sex is just such a charged thing for so many people. I mean, we could go back and we could look at free love movements, and then we could look at, history is fascinating when you start looking at sex in history.
Oh, absolutely. And, every period where we go into sexual liberalism, this is almost always followed by a pushback towards sexual conservatism. It always swings on this pendulum. And so we're in that swing back toward conservatism right now. And I think this has a lot of people worried and fearful. And I know a lot of young people who are kind of like very on edge about this because they see this happening and they think that it's just going to keep going in this direction. And I'm like, calm down, calm your tits. I've seen this happen before, and it's always on a pendulum, and at some point it will start to shift back. So, yes, there's lots of things to be distressed, concerned, worried about right now, but hopefully it will follow the historical pattern and it will stop at some point and we'll start going back the other direction.
That's truly my hope that we use this opportunity of witnessing these new identity movements that are coming forward, that are 100% ascribing to these sexual values of days gone by. And we use this as an opportunity to become more deeply educated so that we can equip the next generation to hopefully make some informed decisions. But I think throughout history, we're just going to watch the pendulum swing and swing. And it's not that I echo what you said. It's not that this is not cause for alarm and we should not be absolutely appalled by some of the things we are seeing. Yes.
Absolutely.
And I hope it's a call to all of us to get even more resourced and educated on why is it that this happens and what could I possibly spread to my community so that we have more information and not less.
Are you looking to boost your sexual health and wellness? Well, there are a ton of supplements on the market promising to do just that. But the hard truth is that finding one that actually lives up to the hype is tough because this market is full of products that contain questionable ingredients or that frankly just don't work. That's why I'm excited to introduce you to VB Health. VB Health is in the business of trust and transparency. Their sexual wellness supplements are doctor-formulated, rigorously third-party tested for purity and potency, and made right here in the USA. Whether you're looking to give your libido a kickstart, to support the health of your semen, or increase vaginal wetness or lubrication, VB Health has something for you. So if you're ready to ditch the shady stuff and choose a sexual health supplement that's effective and that you can feel confident about, it's time to check out VB Health. Learn more and get yours at vb.health. Visit vb.health and use code Justin for 10% off or click the link in the show notes. So let's get real for a moment. From your perspective, is it even realistic, like emotionally, hormonally, developmentally, to expect people to wait until marriage to have sex, especially in an era like the one we live in today, where the average age of first marriage is almost 30? So it's like you're going to go tell a bunch of horny teens that you need to wait like 15 plus years in order to have sex. How do you think that's going to go?
Not well, because if anyone is familiar with Dr. Jack Moran's erotic equation, we have this beautiful, simple equation that says attraction plus obstacle equals excitement. So I like to joke that when we did this whole movement, we just gave hundreds of thousands of horny teens the obstacle they needed to get more excited and want sex even sooner. So lovely question. And I, again, would love to toss this back to you too. When I look at the developmental process of a young person, and I look at the uniqueness of different clients that I work with, I do think for some people who do not even feel desire for penetrative intercourse coming online until around 20, 21 years old, that perhaps they're going to be fine. There's always going to be a subset of human beings who sex is, too. Maybe they're falling under the asexual umbrella and they could be celebrated through things like waiting to have sex until marriage. I always think there's going to be a subset of humans. And yet, I think that our sexual curiosity is actually a great part of us. And so, no, I don't think that it's even a healthy thing to tell young people to not have penetrative intercourse of their choosing, whether it's penis in a vagina or penis in an anus or whatever you want to put a penis in a vulva in. I think that by doing this, the very nature of saying don't do it, I think actually sets young people up for failure and a lack of safety. Because when we are putting an obstacle in the way, most young people are going to run around and find their way to engage in this curious behavior that actually should be celebrated. And so, no, I don't think that we should go around telling young people, hey, don't have the sex that you are interested in. What I think could work instead, and again, small subset of teenager in my house, is doing a lot of education on your wanting and your dislike. Because what I find when I work with clients who now have children like mine, or when I talk to mine, is that when we can center the feeling good, what feels good and what feels bad, I see young people surprisingly great at self-guiding. Yes, I do want that. No, I'm not interested in that. We far underestimate the power of disgust. And when children are able to engage, I don't know if anyone's met a teenager yet, but they are really good at right? This idea of that's the ick. When we are able to encourage them to listen to the ick and lean into that which feels good and alert human beings if ever someone crosses the line, well, then it starts to be really interesting. And then I see young people around me, whether they're friends of my own child's or my clients' kids, I see them, yes, initiating sexual behaviors at various ages. And yet it's aligned with their desires, their curiosities, their boundaries. So no, I don't think we should go around telling young people not to engage in this behavior. But tossing back to you, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not realistic to say, all right, you got to wait a decade, 15 years or longer to have sex, right? For most people, that's not an expectation that they're going to be able to fulfill, right? And, something that I was thinking about with all of this is also that anybody who's a parent knows that when you tell your kids not to do something, well, that often just makes them want to do it even more, right? And I also know this as a pet owner. Like if I tell my cat not to do something, that little fucker's going to go do it
Turns
right
around,
now.
Looks at you and is like,
yeah,
yes.
like, don't you go for that plant. Oh, you fucking bitch. And then she goes right for it. It's like, God damn it.
Every time.
And so it's just like, we know from our own experience that like telling people not to do things just doesn't really do much to deter the behavior. But I do think, based on some of the data that we've been collecting, that we are actually going to see a rise in the number of people who get to their first marriage as a virgin, where they've never had sex before. And that's because in this recent survey that we did at the Kinsey Institute, we asked people, singles, ages 18 all the way up to their 80s, whether they consider themselves to be a virgin. And we define that broadly, meaning never had any type of partnered sex. So no intercourse, no oral sex, no mutual masturbation. And we found that roughly 1 in 5 singles overall considers themselves today to be virgin. But when you look at Gen Z specifically, almost half, like it was 48% who considered themselves to be a virgin. And I'm stunned by that figure. And I don't think it's because of like success of abstinence only education or people telling kids not to have sex. Like I think that this has a lot more to do with kids today spending so much more time in their technological worlds, which creates fewer opportunities for in-person interactions, but it's also tied to reductions in binge drinking among young adults. And we know that alcohol was a big facilitator of a lot of sexual encounters previously. And so, yes, positively for public health, like less binge drinking, that's good, but that also goes along with less sex. And, there's all these other factors like the rise in teen anxiety and use of antidepressants and so forth, pushing down desire for sex. Like there's a lot going on, and it's not because of abstinence, but I think we are going to see a lot more people who make it to their first marriage just never having had sex.
I do too. And I work with the folks who are now approaching that from the abstinence only movement and from parents who were insistent upon this. And so I work with a lot of folks preparing for first intercourse, whether it is in their 30s and 40s, whether it's for marriage or whether it's for I'm in a relationship and all of a sudden I'm realizing I don't want to do this anymore. And we talk often about sexual skills. And they're like any other skill. It has to be practiced. And so it is sad to think that we would purposely want to withhold skill building from young people. Again, I'm all for less binge drinking and less sexual encounters that were not actually desired.
Exactly.
I'm here for it. And yet I think we need to be encouraging skill building and encouraging titrating risk and encouraging, growing in the communication skills that are built through multiple sexual encounters over time. And I'm sad because I get to work with that person who feels such shame for still being a quote unquote virgin at fill in the blank age. And they feel unexperienced. They feel like they will never satisfy a partner. They feel that then there's no way to work themselves out of this. So yeah, I've been reading and watching your new research sharing, and I have wondered, if it's going to be a whole crop of folks that are needing some skills in their later years. Mm-hmm.
I don't think you're going to be out of a job anytime soon.
Don't think so. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think one of the other big issues here is when it comes to these abstinence pledges, they usually go along with abstinence only education, which tends to be pretty minimal in terms of what people learn. And, the only thing they really learn about sex is to just don't do it or just say no to it, which also raises the issue of sexual consent and you've only learned how to say no. So how do you learn how to say yes and to advocate for what it is that you want and what it is that you need and enjoy? And so I think there's just a lot of negative downstream consequences. And this idea that all right, just sign the abstinence pledge and we'll teach you what you need to know when you're going to get married. Well, that sex education never comes later down the road.
As someone who didn't get it, no, it never came. I was going to say that I think what's also fascinating about this part of just saying no to penetrative intercourse, right? That there's such an emphasis on the procreative model of sexuality, right? There's such an emphasis on that so often people are not getting the sexuality education that includes that for people with a vulva and a clitoris, that penetrative intercourse is not often their favorite form of sex. Mm-hmm. And so I work with so many people who will say, Lauren, why was it that when we were engaged, we'd fool around and mess around and I was orgasming so easily, and now we're having sex, which is what the church always told me would be good. And now I'm never experiencing any pleasure. And now he comes and then we're done. And what's wrong with me is so often what I get. And so I think one of the other silly, almost erotic things that happens out of purity culture and abstinence only until marriage pledges is that a lot of teenagers and young people find out all of the other things that they can do as opposed to this procreative sexual encounter that should be saved for marriage. But then they get into marriage and that's all they do. They don't do any of the fun stuff anymore. All of those really great oral sex things they were doing in the back of the car, they're gone. Mm-hmm. And then we're not even throwing in the idea that for so many of our formative sexual years, we were playing with violating prohibitions. One of my favorite things with my clients who have come out of purity culture is to dip back into those formative memories of how can we now bring naughtiness into your very godly marriage, because the things that your body learned as erotic intelligence, you've now just thrown away. You've forgotten it all. And so I think one of the other harms that often gets glossed over is that we did everything but that procreative thing because we were told that was most holy. But then we get into these marriages that are now condoned. And not only are they now approved, so there's no more obstacles, now also they're the one thing that doesn't really bring a lot of pleasure to a person with a vulva and a clitoris.
Yeah. And something else too about waiting for marriage to have sex with somebody is that you might also discover on your wedding night that you're not actually sexually compatible with this other person, right? And that's a whole other thing is you've just made this commitment, and marriage is generally speaking thought of as a lifelong commitment to someone with whom maybe your bodies just don't line up all that well, or maybe you're not into the same things or like or enjoy or want the same things. And so then that creates a whole other issue or layer of how do you navigate that sexual incompatibility?
As someone who is married to a man who's now happily gay for a decade, Justin, I can tell you that yes, I was never, ever given any information on sexual compatibility, any information on mismatched desire or anything of that nature. Instead, I was, given lots of information about, you might be a nymphomaniac, right? There might be something wrong with you. But never did it occur to me that this could be a matter of mismatched orientation. Never. And that's downright dangerous and downright harmful. Yeah. And both to my precious, precious ex-husband and myself, that we didn't think there was another option. We should have annulled. I knew right away. I came out on our honeymoon in some lingerie. He laughed at me. And now, knowing his orientation, of course, and yet you better believe that went straight to my soul. And I thought, I must be hideous, right? I didn't think, maybe we are not erotically aligned. Maybe he's attracted to men. No, that never crossed my mind. Instead, I read books about how you could never discuss these types of matters with anyone else, which is abusive and unhealthy. But I didn't know that you could go seek help for this. I didn't know. And yes, I think that we downplay the importance of aligning our longings sexually. I tell my clients all the time, it's good to want, and it's really good to stand in those wants, because then another person can see if they align with those wants, and that it is not okay to tell someone else how they have to engage in sex with us. That's not okay, but it is okay to put our wants forward. It is okay to say, I'm interested in this. What about you? But inside of a marriage, that's not an option. You must, in the words of my mother on my wedding night, take care of your husband's needs. And then apparently you're going to be blessed. Never got that blessing.
All right. So we're running short on time, but I have one more question for you, which is for anybody listening who maybe took an abstinence pledge or was part of purity culture and they're now feeling conflicted. What do you want them to know? And where can they go if they're looking for help and resources?
It's going to make me cry. I want them to know that they're not alone. I want them to know that they are not sexually broken. I want you to know that there is help, and your sex and the sex that you want and the sex that you crave is good, and your body is good, and your pleasure is good. If you want to work with someone like me, you can go to sexedforyou.com/connect. If you want more resources, you can go to my Instagram, which is sexedforyou. If you want to learn from brilliant minds, I strongly, strongly recommend Dr. Reverend Beverly Dale's book, Who Told You That You Were Naked? It is a beautiful, beautiful journaling, meditative practice with also some deep research from her book that's made more for clinicians. So if you're a little nerdy like me, you might really enjoy advancing sexual health for the Christian client. In the back, there's a whole spreadsheet of what you might have been taught, and then what a sex-positive pastor could tell you, and what a sex therapist could tell you. And it's really, really transformational for a lot of my clients. So again, sexedforyou.com/connect if you want to talk to me and know you're not alone. But there's many other resources out there, and can't recommend folks like Rev Bev with the Incarnation Institute enough.
Well, thank you so much for this amazing conversation, Lauren. It was a pleasure to have you here. Can you please tell my listeners one more time where they can go to learn more about you and your work?
Go to sexedforyou.com/connect or find me on Instagram, my most active platform. And the real full handle is sex_ed_for_you. But typically, if you search Sex Ed for You, I will come up if I'm not shadow banned in this given moment.
Well, that's always a question that we don't know the answer to when we work in this area. But so thank you so much again for your time. I really appreciate having you here.
Thank you for having me, truly.
Thank you for listening. To keep up with new episodes of this podcast, visit my website, Sex and Psychology, at sexandpsychology.com, or subscribe on your favorite platform, where I hope you'll take a moment to rate and review the show. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please consider becoming a Sex and Psychology Premium subscriber to enjoy ad-free listening for just $3.99 a month. You can also follow me on social media for daily sex research updates. I'm on Blue Sky and X at Justin Lehmiller and Instagram at Justin J. Lehmiller. Also, be sure to check out my book, Tell Me What You Want. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.